Started off like one of those evenings you barely expect to remember. One of those low-stakes, show-your-face kind of nights where you go because your partner insists, not because you really want to. Hannah and I had been invited to a private party in a rental house on the far edge of Boise, the kind of upscale short-term rental meant to look rustic, but clearly curated for Instagram. It had wood-paneled walls, Edison bulbs, a fire pit out back, and a soundtrack of curated indie playlists echoing from a Bluetooth speaker hidden somewhere in the kitchen. Everything was trying just a little too hard to feel effortless. Hannah said it would be good for us to be around people. I didn't argue. We hadn't been doing much lately, just orbiting each other at home, passing like background noise in our own lives. Her friends were going to be there, mostly coworkers I didn't know beyond vague names and polite nods. Still, I agreed. Not because I believed it would fix anything, but because part of me wanted to believe it could. We showed up around 8:30. She looked great. I told her so in the car and she smiled, a small, automatic smile, the kind she gave out of obligation more than anything else lately. She was wearing that olive green dress I always liked on her, with the little gold hoops she used to save for date nights. I remember wondering, quietly, who she was dressing for now. The house was already buzzing when we walked in. That warm, talk-over-each-other kind of noise. Laughter from the back deck. The smell of wine and candles and some kind of charcuterie spread in the kitchen. People standing in little social pods. Co-workers catching up after hours. Spouses and partners smiling politely through small talk. I grabbed a drink, stayed near her for the first few minutes, then drifted to a quiet spot by the wall once I saw her fall easily into conversation. I didn't mind. Honestly, I expected that. I'm not great at parties. I'm the guy who finds the dog, or starts helping the host clean dishes before the night is over. I figured I'd find my way to a corner, sip something amber-colored, and wait for her to be ready to leave. That was the plan, anyway. About 45 minutes in, I was standing at one of the tall cocktail tables near the kitchen, absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone to give myself something to do. That's when I looked up and saw her. Hannah was across the room, standing near the hallway that led to the bedrooms. And she wasn't alone. She was hugging someone. Not the quick, one-arm-around-the-shoulder type of hug you give a coworker. Not even the friendly double-pat hug you give someone you haven't seen in a while. This was different. It was slow, intentional. She leaned into it with her whole body, head tilted slightly like she was resting against him. Like this was a place she'd been before. His arms wrapped around her waist in a way that felt owned. Like this was familiar for them, practiced even. And maybe the worst part was the look on her face. Relaxed, comfortable, a little too at home in his space. It was one of those moments where your body registers something before your brain catches up. Like a sudden drop in temperature. I didn't move, just stared, trying to tell myself I was reading too much into it, that it was nothing. But then she looked up and saw me. For a split second, our eyes locked. Hers went wide, not surprised exactly, but alert, caught, like a switch flipped behind her eyes. That easy, warm expression evaporated instantly, replaced by something tighter, controlled. She stepped back from him like it had just occurred to her how it looked, laughed at something he said, waved her hand like she was brushing off a joke, but she didn't look back at me. That was when the ground shifted. When she finally made her way over to me 10, maybe 15 minutes later, it was like I had done something wrong. She was cold. Not angry, just inconvenienced. Like I had interrupted a perfectly fine evening by daring to exist in the same room. Having fun? I asked casually, still trying to play it cool. She shrugged. It's fine. Her tone was clipped. No warmth. No invitation to keep the conversation going. Just a full stop. I watched her sip from her glass and scan the room like she was already bored with me. Like the night was happening elsewhere and she was just checking in with her assigned date. Every time I tried to talk, to ask who that guy was or how work had been lately, she answered like she couldn't believe I was still talking. When I finally brought up the hug, gently, without accusation, just a simple, "Hey, who was that guy you were talking to earlier?" She rolled her eyes. "Seriously?" she said. "Is this really what we're doing tonight?" That was it. No explanation. No name. No context. Just immediate deflection and irritation, as if the problem wasn't the hug or the way it looked, but the fact that I had noticed. I was suddenly the overreacting boyfriend, the one who couldn't relax, the guy ruining the vibe with his insecurity. The distance between us, which had been slowly creeping in for months, stretched all the way out in that moment. And I saw her, really saw her, like I hadn't been able to before, not as my girlfriend, not as the person I'd built a future around, but as someone who had already emotionally left the room long before I caught up. I stood there in silence for a while, drink in hand, watching her float through the party like nothing had happened. She laughed with her friends, leaned into conversations like they were the most interesting things in the world. Meanwhile, I was still trying to convince myself I hadn't just watched the end of something that was supposed to matter. Eventually, I walked into the kitchen and found a napkin. I borrowed a pen off the counter and scribbled down a few words. Heading home. Don't wait up. That was it. I left it folded on the corner of the island, near her half-finished drink, and walked out the front door. No scene. No argument. Just the dull thud of the door closing behind me. Outside, the cold hit immediately, a sharp contrast to the warmth inside. The music was still thumping, muffled through the walls, as I stepped down the front porch and onto the driveway. A few other cars were parked along the curb, some with fogged-up windows, laughter drifting faintly from the backyard. But I didn't feel like laughing. I didn't even feel like speaking. Strange, the way something breaks in silence. There wasn't a fight, no yelling, no dramatic moment, just a hug across the room and a look in her eyes that told me, without a single word, that I wasn't the person she chose anymore. And that hurt more than anything she could have said. I got in the car and sat there for a long minute with my hands on the steering wheel, the engine off. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't even angry, not yet, just numb. Numb and exhausted and hollowed out in a way I didn't know how to name. I stared through the windshield, half expecting her to come out after me, or at least text. She didn't, and I didn't wait. I started the car and drove home in silence, the night pressing in on all sides. Streetlights flickered by one after the other. The inside of the car felt cavernous, like even my thoughts didn't want to sit too close. That night didn't end with a door slamming or a dramatic revelation. It ended the moment she made me feel like a stranger in the middle of a crowded room, and didn't even blink. Driving home that night felt like watching a movie I already knew the ending to. The city lights flicked across the windshield in a rhythm, almost like they were counting down something I hadn't admitted to myself yet. I wasn't even mad. Not yet. Just strangely calm. Like when you finally give in to a truth that's been stalking you for longer than you can remember. But once the front door clicked shut behind me, once I was back inside our house, the house we'd painted together, furnished together, fought over rugs and light fixtures together, the silence swallowed me. And in that silence, all the little pieces I had carefully ignored over the past few months started floating to the surface. It's not like I hadn't noticed things before. I just explained them away, smoothed over the edges, told myself I was imagining things. But sitting there in the dark living room, coat still on, keys still in my hand, I started to actually feel it. All of it. Like the dam finally cracked. It started with the obvious stuff. The way she'd started coming home late more often. Not every night, just enough to plant seeds. First, it was work. Always work. A last-minute meeting. A delayed project. The clients being impossible again. And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She's always been ambitious. Driven. Her phone buzzing constantly didn't seem strange. Not at first. But then there were the patterns. Specific days. Always the same excuses. Always the same vague reasons, never more than what was absolutely necessary. And I started noticing how she never let that phone out of her sight. Not just at home, but everywhere. If she went to the bathroom, it came with her. Shower? She'd wrap it in a towel and take it into the steamy bathroom with her. We'd be watching TV and she'd get a message. And then suddenly she'd remember laundry or dishes, or something she had to look at in another room. Once or twice, I'd ask, half joking, "Everything okay?" "Just work stuff," she'd say. flashing a smile that didn't touch her eyes. You wouldn't want to hear about it. Boring client drama. But the tension in her shoulders would give her away. The speed at which she changed the subject. The way she'd sit just out of reach on the couch, curling away from me like someone preserving a secret. Then there was how she started reacting to basic questions like I was interrogating her. Not even deep questions. I'd ask things like, "What time will you be home tonight?" And her jaw would tense. "Why do you ask?" Or worse, the cold stare, the long pause before she answered, as if trying to decide which version of the truth I'd believe. It was like walking through a house where all the furniture had been rearranged slightly. Nothing drastic, but enough to make you bump into things. Enough to make you feel off balance. I remember one night in particular. She came home past 11, said she had dinner with her manager and a few team leads. I asked if everything was okay, because she looked different, flushed, not happy or sad, just distant. She nodded, gave me a short, "Yeah, just tired," and walked straight upstairs without another word. I sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the 2 empty glasses I had set out, and felt something twist in my chest. I told myself not to overthink it, but over time it wasn't just her absences. It was how she was when she was around, how she stopped reaching for me at night, how hugs became one-armed and rushed, how kisses turned into forehead pecks, how every genuine moment of warmth seemed rationed, as if she was calculating how much emotion she could afford to show. Even our fights changed. They used to be real, passionate, frustrating, sure, but real. But now every disagreement turned icy, distant. If I brought up feeling disconnected, she'd sigh dramatically and say I was too sensitive lately. If I tried to talk about us, she'd check her phone mid-conversation or stare blankly at a spot on the wall. Once, after I said, "I miss you, even when you're right here," she just looked at me like I'd spoken in a different language. That hurt more than I admitted at the time. There were moments I chalked it up to stress. Maybe she was going through something. Maybe we were going through something. We'd been together long enough to know that every relationship hits rough patches. Right? That's what I told myself. Over and over again. But in my gut, I knew. I think I started knowing long before that night at the party. There was a week in early spring when she went on a work retreat. 2 days out of town. Said it was at a small conference center by the river. The kind with team-building exercises and awkward icebreakers. She barely texted the whole time. Said service was bad. When she came back, there were barely any stories. Usually she'd come back with gossip. "You wouldn't believe what Dave did," or "My boss got so drunk." This time, nothing. Just a tired smile and a bag full of untouched clothes. When I asked how it went, she said, "Fine, kinda boring." That's it. But a few days later, I noticed she had a new set of earrings. Small, gold ones. I didn't remember seeing them before. I asked if they were new. She paused. "No, I've had them for a while." That was a lie. I was sure of it. I remembered noticing things like that. I always noticed her jewelry, because she didn't wear much of it. And something about the way she said it, too fast, too flat, stuck with me. I let it go. Told myself I was overthinking. But I didn't forget. I also didn't forget the night I woke up around 2 a.m. and found her sitting in the kitchen in the dark, phone in hand, smiling at the screen. When she saw me, she jumped like a guilty teenager. "Couldn't sleep," she said. I nodded, but her phone was already flipped screen down on the table. "What are you looking at?" "Nothing. Just scrolling." But the screen dimmed quickly, way too quickly, and she slid it into her pocket before I could glance. Later that week, I casually mentioned maybe doing a weekend trip together, just to reconnect. I thought it was a good idea. She didn't. Her answer? "I don't have time for that right now." And that was that. So many small moments. So many coincidences. But I didn't want to believe the worst. I really didn't. There's something pathetic about admitting you ignored your own instincts. But I did. For months, I kept hoping things would settle. That it was just a phase. That stress or burnout or some invisible fog was clouding her. That she'd snap out of it and things would feel like us again. But looking back now, the distance wasn't accidental. It wasn't a result of stress or confusion or growing pains. It was orchestrated. She wasn't just slipping away. She was building a different life behind the scenes. I think that's what hit me hardest as I sat on our living room couch that night after the party. It wasn't just that something had happened. It was that she had been happening this whole time, without me. All those sharp replies, the sudden protectiveness over her phone, the defensiveness when I asked simple questions. They weren't random. They weren't reactions to me being difficult. They were calculated. Defensive responses from someone with something to hide. She wasn't growing apart. She was covering tracks. I stayed up until almost 4 a.m. That night, I didn't even turn on the lights, just sat in the dark, going over every conversation, every excuse, every change in routine that I'd filed away as not worth bringing up. Now they all played back with a new kind of clarity, a horrifying, logical sequence. And what scared me most wasn't that I had missed it, is that I had seen it, piece by piece, and still convinced myself it wasn't there. A few days passed after the party. She came home late again the next night, no explanation, no apology. Just the jingle of keys in the door, a casual hey, and a walk straight past me like I wasn't even there. I sat on the couch with my laptop open, pretending to watch something on the screen, but really, I was listening to the way she dropped her bag in the hallway, the way she kicked off her shoes, the way she didn't ask how my day was. She went straight upstairs, took a long shower, then crawled into bed and faced the wall. No conversation, no eye contact. That was how things had been lately, coexisting under the same roof, like strangers politely avoiding each other in a waiting room. But something about that night sat differently. I didn't sleep. My chest was heavy, not with panic, but with something heavier than that. Certainty. There wasn't any ambiguity left. All the signs I had ignored had finally stacked high enough that I couldn't look over them anymore. I didn't know what the truth was yet, but I knew I was going to find it. And I did by accident. It happened on a Wednesday. She had left for work in the morning in a rush, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize, one of those mid-length ones that looked expensive. It wasn't like her to leave things behind, but in her scramble, she left her laptop sitting open on the kitchen table. Still on. Still logged in. I didn't plan to snoop. Honestly, I stood there staring at the glowing screen for a good minute, going back and forth with myself. I'd never looked through her stuff. Even when things felt off, I held back. I thought if I crossed that line, it would say something about me. That I didn't trust her. That I was paranoid. That I was slipping into someone I didn't want to be. But that morning, something in me shifted. I wasn't looking for peace of mind anymore. I was looking for confirmation. The screen was open to her inbox. Nothing suspicious at first. Promotional emails, newsletters, a message from HR. But then, halfway down the list, one line stood out. Your reservation is confirmed, Crossroads Motel. I clicked it. It was a confirmation from a budget motel off the highway, about 30 minutes outside Boise. The kind of place you wouldn't stop at unless you didn't want to be seen. The kind with peeling paint on the sign and hourly rates that made you uncomfortable. She had booked a room under her name. That alone said a lot. She wasn't even trying to hide the paper trail. The booking was for 2 nights ago. I stared at the screen like it might change. I refreshed the page, half expecting it to vanish. But it didn't. It stayed there, cold and blunt and devastating. I clicked through more emails, searched for the motel's name. My stomach sank. It wasn't the first time. There were 5 separate bookings, all within the last 2 months. Always for weeknights. Always coinciding with the nights she said she had to stay late. Sometimes she booked in advance. Other times it was same day, like she hadn't even planned to lie until it became convenient. And yet, what crushed me the most was how normal she acted afterward. How easily she came home, made herself tea, scrolled through her phone, while I sat across from her thinking she just had a long day at work. She kissed me once the same night as one of those bookings. Absent-minded, like brushing lint off a sweater, and I remembered thinking maybe we're okay. I felt sick. I sat back in the chair, my pulse loud in my ears. My hand was trembling. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to know. But part of me still didn't want to believe it. Maybe she went there alone. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. So I drove there. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Closure, maybe. Or denial, something I could cling to, a detail that would let me pretend for a little longer. It was a Thursday afternoon, a little after 2. I told work I wasn't feeling well, got in the car, and drove 31 minutes down a stretch of highway I didn't normally take. The motel sat behind a gas station, hidden from the main road by a row of leafless trees. The sign buzzed with half-dead neon. The parking lot was half full. It looked exactly like the kind of place people went to not be noticed. I parked across the street and just sat there watching. For 20 minutes. Maybe more. The front office was small, one of those old-school setups where someone sat behind a glass window, half reading a magazine. I finally worked up the nerve, walked across the lot, and stepped inside. The man at the desk was middle-aged, heavy-set, smelled like mint and cigarettes. He looked up without much interest. "Checking in?" he asked. "No," I said. "I was just wondering if someone stayed here earlier this week." He raised an eyebrow. "We don't give out names." "I'm not asking for names," I said. I think my partner might have been here. I just need to know if she was alone." He gave me a long look. I could see the moment he decided he didn't care enough to lie. "What day?" "Tuesday night." He clicked something on the monitor, leaned forward slightly. "Room 112. A pause. "She wasn't alone." That was all he said. I nodded, trying to hold my face still. "Okay, thanks." He didn't ask anything else. Just went back to his magazine like this happened every other day. And maybe it did. I walked out into the sunlight, which felt too bright all of a sudden. Got in my car. Gripped the wheel with both hands. I wasn't sure whether to scream or break down. But nothing came. Just this strange, dull stillness. Like someone had hit pause on everything I thought I understood. It was real now. Not a theory. Not suspicion. Not paranoia. She had been cheating. Not emotionally. Not maybe. Not. She's just going through something. She had lied. Repeatedly. With planning. With intention. She had chosen someone else over and over again, and then come home to me like nothing had changed. I didn't go back to work that day. I drove aimlessly around the outskirts of town, barely aware of where I was going. I ended up parked behind an empty strip mall, just sitting there watching the wind move trash around an abandoned lot. Everything felt hollow. I thought about asking her. I even rehearsed it in my head. I know. Just that. Nothing else. See how she'd respond. If she'd finally dropped the act. But I didn't. Couldn't. Something in me had already let go. Because when the truth finally shows up in full daylight, when it stands there in front of you, undeniable and naked, you stop craving confession. You don't need it anymore. It's not about catching them in a lie. It's about admitting you've already outgrown the version of yourself that needed their honesty to heal. I got home late. She was already in bed, or pretending to be. Her purse was tossed near the stairs, half open. The same laptop sat on the dining table, now closed. I walked past it, didn't touch it again, didn't say anything to her that night, or the next. I just watched, quietly, knowing what I knew, waiting to see if she'd say anything. She didn't. Not once. After that day, something inside me shut off. It wasn't a decision exactly, more like a circuit breaker flipping. Quiet. Sudden. Final. I didn't tell her I knew. I didn't storm into the bedroom demanding answers. I didn't hold up my phone with evidence or scroll through the motel receipts. What was the point? I had already seen enough. The truth wasn't hiding anymore. It was sitting in my chest, cold and still. And somehow that stillness gave me clarity. There was no fixing this. No dramatic confrontation. No turning it into a teachable moment for our love. There was no us left to save. Just a slow, silent process of detachment. One that had probably started long before I was willing to admit it. We kept living under the same roof, but it wasn't a home anymore. It was a waiting room. She didn't know I had seen the motel emails. She didn't know I had gone there, and I didn't tell her. I wanted to see how long she could pretend, how long she could look me in the eye and ask if I wanted anything from the store, how many dinners we could eat in the same room without her noticing I was already gone. The shift was subtle, but it was there in the details. I stopped making coffee in the mornings like I used to. I didn't remind her about her dentist appointment or ask how work was going. I didn't reach for her when I climbed into bed, and I didn't flinch when she didn't reach for me. If she noticed, she didn't say anything. We were two ghosts walking the same floorboards. Some days, I wondered if she was relieved, if my silence gave her the freedom to keep doing what she was doing without the guilt of having to lie directly. She still smiled at her phone, still came home late without warning. Sometimes she'd toss her keys onto the table and say, "Sorry, long day," without even looking at me. I'd nod. All good. And it was, at least for me, because I had stopped needing anything from her. That's the part that surprised me. How quickly I adapted. How easily I slid into a rhythm that didn't involve her. I thought it would be harder. I thought it would tear something out of me, but it didn't. It felt like finally putting down a heavy bag you didn't realize you'd been carrying. At night, I started sleeping in the spare room. The first time, I told her I had a headache and needed space. She didn't argue, just said, "Okay," and rolled over. That was it. No, "What's wrong?" No, "Come back to bed." No attempt to reach for the life we used to share. I never went back to our room. She never asked why. In the guest room, everything felt still. There was no perfume on the pillows, no long strands of hair on the sheets. Just blank walls and white linens and silence. And for the first time in a long time, I started to feel like myself again. The version of me that didn't have to brace for impact every time I walked through the front door. I started taking small steps, quiet ones. I went through my side of the closet and pulled out things I didn't wear anymore. Packed a few boxes, clothes, books, old journals, my favorite mug. Things that were mine, untouched by her. I organized my important documents, printed out bank statements, created a spreadsheet of shared bills, credit cards, passwords. She never noticed. I cleared out a drawer in the kitchen, moved my shaving kit to a travel bag. I even started looking at apartments across town, just to see what was out there. Not with urgency, just curiosity. A way of reminding myself there was life beyond this stale, quiet collapse. She still didn't notice. Or maybe she did and didn't care. That, more than anything, confirmed what I already knew. We weren't partners anymore. We were cohabitants, politely circling each other in a space neither of us wanted to claim. We still had conversations, technically. "What time do you need the car? Did you feed the dog? I'm heading to the store, want anything?" But they were shallow, like placeholder dialogue in a bad script. No weight, no warmth. Just two people filling silence with whatever scraps of civility they had left. Some nights she'd watch TV in the living room with her feet tucked under her, wine glass in hand, eyes glued to her phone. I'd pass through to grab something from the kitchen, and she wouldn't even look up. It used to hurt. Now it just felt expected. I remember one afternoon, a Sunday. We were both home. Rain was tapping against the windows, soft and steady, and the whole house felt gray. I was in the office, going through old photo folders on my laptop. There was one from a trip we took to Portland 3 years ago. Her in a red beanie, laughing with a coffee in hand. Me awkwardly trying to hold the camera steady. We looked happy. Real. I stared at it for a long time, then quietly moved it to an external drive. Then I deleted it from the computer. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I just didn't want to carry it anymore. Around dinner time, I walked into the kitchen and found her sitting at the table with a salad, watching something on her iPad. She looked up, startled, like I'd walked in on a moment that wasn't meant to be shared. "Hey," she said, half smiling. "Hey," I said back. We stood there, silent. For a second, I thought she might say something more. Ask where I'd been or what I was thinking. But she didn't. She went back to her screen, and I walked back to my room. That was the moment I realized I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I wasn't hoping for an apology or an explanation. I wasn't even curious about who he was or what they did at the motel. I didn't want to know how it started or why she felt the need to hide it. I had crossed over into something colder. Not revenge, not sadness. Just absence. The version of me that wanted to fix things had already packed his bags and left. And she didn't even notice the vacancy. The days blurred together after that. Work, errands, silence. I started getting up earlier, going to bed earlier. I made my own meals, cleaned my own dishes, took long walks just to avoid being in the same room for too long. We started moving like strangers who shared a hallway but never a moment. She must have felt it, that something was shifting. But maybe it worked for her too. Maybe my silence gave her cover. Maybe she thought we were settling into some new version of peace, and this was just the natural distance of time. Or maybe she just didn't care enough to ask. That thought used to wreck me. Now it just confirmed what I needed to know. There wasn't going to be a fight. No fireworks. No final conversation where one of us begged the other to stay. We were past that. She had already made her choice, and I was finally making mine. The only difference? I was quiet about it. I wasn't going to announce my plans. I wasn't going to leave a dramatic letter or a voicemail at midnight. I was going to leave the same way she had left our relationship. Slowly, carefully, with everything that mattered packed away before the exit even began. Even after everything I'd seen, everything I knew, you'd think the weight of it would taper off. You'd expect the pain to settle, the fog to lift, or at least the questions to stop showing up uninvited. But what came next wasn't some final breaking point. It was worse than that. It was a slow, steady trickle of truth. Not one explosion, just dozens of tiny cuts. Small details. That's what did it. Not the motel receipt. Not the confirmation from the front desk guy. Not even her cold silence. It was the details that made it real in a way I couldn't ignore. Little things that suddenly stood out like warning signs in reverse. Subtle in the moment but screaming in hindsight. Like the lipstick. I found it under the passenger seat of her car. I was cleaning out the glove compartment, trying to find the registration form for a new parking permit, when it rolled out. A shade of red I had never seen her wear. Too bold for her usual taste. It was bright and slightly smudged at the tip, like it had been used quickly. No cap. I held it between my fingers for a long time, just staring at it. The makeup bag she normally kept in her purse didn't have anything like it. This was something different. Something recent. Something not for me. I put it back where I found it and closed the door. Then there was the bar receipt. It had fallen between the cushions of the couch, barely sticking out. I almost missed it. Dated on a night she told me she was working late. Again. A downtown bar. 2 cocktails, 1 appetizer. Paid in cash. I only caught the date because the printed ink was starting to fade, and something told me to take a closer look. I don't know why I kept finding these things. I wasn't snooping. Not intentionally. But it was like the universe was tired of watching me play dumb. Like it was saying, here's what you're pretending not to see. Again. And maybe the worst part was that she didn't even bother hiding them well. Or maybe she didn't think I was looking anymore. Maybe she figured I'd already given up, or that I was too far gone to notice what she left behind. But I did notice. I noticed the new clothes that showed up without explanation. A jacket with tags still on it, tucked in the back of her closet. Lingerie that looked like it belonged in someone else's story. Not mine. Not ours. I noticed the shift in her scent. A different perfume. Spicier. Heavier. She wore it on nights she went out with friends. Though I never saw her take a single photo. No stories, no tags. Not even group texts left open accidentally. Just a vague "it was good" when I asked how the night went, followed by silence. And I noticed how she started humming again. That might sound stupid, but Hannah used to hum when she was happy. She'd walk around the kitchen with a mug of tea, humming whatever was stuck in her head. It used to be one of those quiet little things I loved. Something real. And for months it had disappeared completely. Until one morning I heard it again, soft under her breath, as she got ready in the bathroom. She was humming, smiling faintly in the mirror. Not at me. Not because of me. And that was when I realized I was no longer part of her joy. There were other things, too. Her laptop history. The hotel website she'd visited more than once. An online order for a single wine glass shipped to a different address. Likely his. I didn't need to know his name to start building a picture. It was already clear in the patterns. A rhythm that didn't include me. She had a second life. And I was the ghost in the attic. Even old photos started looking different. I came across some from her last retreat. The one she barely spoke about. Group selfies, hotel pool shots, all innocent enough. But when I looked closely, I saw something that made my chest tighten. The same man, again and again. Same smirk, same too familiar hand on her lower back. In the background of 3 different pictures. His presence was quiet, but constant. At first glance, you'd never think anything of it. But now that I knew where to look, I couldn't unsee it. The way she tilted toward him. The ease in their body language. The kind of closeness that doesn't show up overnight. It had been happening for a long time. And I'd been right there, sleeping beside her, while it all unfolded. The emotional distance, the sudden coldness, the excuses layered like blankets. It had all been scaffolding, keeping the truth out of view just long enough for me to stop trying. And I had stopped. That was the truth. I stopped asking questions. Stopped reaching out. Stopped checking in. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to confirm what I already knew. I chose silence over answers, and in doing so, I let her disappear into someone else's arms while still claiming space in our shared bed. But now, with all the puzzle pieces laid out, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was exhausted. Exhausted by the pretending, by the waiting, by the constant second-guessing of my own memory. I couldn't remember the last time we laughed together, or the last time she touched me without flinching, or the last time I felt like a partner instead of a placeholder. The home we built together had become a storage unit for things that no longer belonged to either of us. We still ate under the same roof, but never at the same time. She still folded laundry, but my clothes started ending up in a separate pile. Our fridge had 2 different brands of milk, 2 jars of mustard, 2 people keeping up appearances. One night, I came home to find her asleep on the couch, her phone unlocked beside her. I don't know what made me glance at the screen, but when I did, I saw a name I didn't recognize and a preview of a message that said, "Last night was worth the risk." That was the only confirmation I needed. I didn't click it. I didn't read more. I didn't take screenshots. I just stood there in the doorway and felt everything inside me settle into a cold, quiet certainty. It was over. Had been for a while. But now it had shape, edges, proof, a timeline. Not a question of if or maybe. Just a matter of when. The next morning, she asked if I could help her take her car in for service. I said sure. I still helped. Still drove her back home. Still made small talk about the weather. Because leaving wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about catching her in the act and throwing it in her face. It was about letting go of something that no longer held its form. A balloon that had drifted too far to pull back. That night, I went back to my room, pulled out the boxes I had packed weeks earlier, and added the final pieces. Passport, USB drive, a book she once gave me, now unreadable, my father's old watch, the keys to the storage unit I'd quietly rented on the other side of town. It was all ready, everything I needed, everything that was still mine. No more snooping, no more wondering, no more hoping she'd choose me again, because she already had. She just didn't choose this version of me. I left just after sunrise. No note, no confrontation, no last plea for honesty. Just a packed bag, my documents, and a key dropped on the kitchen counter. She was still asleep, or pretending to be. I didn't check. The house was silent, still, almost peaceful, like it had been waiting for me to go. I didn't cry. I didn't even pause at the door, because the truth is, I'd already left weeks ago in my heart. That morning was just logistics. I drove without music, without a real destination. All I knew was I couldn't stay in a place I'd already been erased from. I didn't leave in anger. I left in acceptance, and that was louder than anything I could have said. Weeks later, I heard she told people I'd disappeared, said I was unstable, cold, that I gave up. I didn't argue, didn't correct her. The truth didn't need defending. It had already played out. I started fresh in a quiet town. Small place, new job. I kept to myself. And slowly, the noise in my head settled. I didn't miss her. I missed who I thought she was. The end didn't come at the motel or with the lipstick or the message on her phone. It came the moment I saw her in someone else's arms and felt nothing. That's when I knew. I had no home to return to, only a life to rebuild, one step, one morning, one breath at a time.